Hi everyone, in this video I want to talk about prophylaxis. I want to start with a discussion about what prophylaxis is and then show a real example of how you can apply a prophylactic thinking technique in your own chess games. As always, if you are new to the channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button to never miss a video, and do smash that like button if you're getting value out of these videos to help them reach more people. So to answer the question of what is prophylaxis, prophylaxis is the act of guarding against what your opponent might be about to do. So it's centered more around looking to prevent your opponent's ideas if they are dangerous ideas that you want to prevent, as opposed to actively seeking to carry out your own plan. Although that's not to say that you can't at times play a prophylactic move which both guards against what your opponent is trying to do and continues to push forward your own plan at the same time. I did actually research the origin of this word prophylaxis for the purpose of this video, and literally translated it's a combination of two words. So the word phylaxis is taken from Greek and literally means to guard against, and the word pro is taken from English, meaning before. So when combined to become the word prophylaxis, we have the meaning of guarding against something before it happens. A really simple example of a prophylactic move can be seen in this position here. So white has just played bishop c4 and is now eyeing this weak pawn on f7, and there could be a potential for a knight to jump into g5 at a later point. Now it can't currently do that because the queen is guarding this square, but if the knight were to develop to say f6, then this white knight could jump into g5, and whilst this is a perfectly respectable way for black to play, provided that you know what you're doing after the move d5, in many beginner games of chess, players don't necessarily even want to get into this variation, and so instead of playing knight f6 on move 3, they instead play pawn to h6, taking away this g5 square from the knight, and therefore preventing this idea of white to attack this f7 pawn. Now this isn't the best move in the position, because you're neglecting the development of your minor pieces, and white is now getting a significant lead in development after castles. But this is a very simple example of a prophylactic move where you played a move designed to guard against a plan which your opponent was looking to execute on. So with that in mind, we can now take a look at this more complex middle game position and think about how white could play prophylactically here to try and prevent his opponent's plans. Now the material is even here for both sides, however white stands slightly better, and a big part of this fact is that the white position is more fluid, and by that we mean that white has more options available to him for how to push his pawns and manoeuvre his pieces. One of the big problems for black is that the bishop on b7 is entombed by these light squared pawns right now, and so really black wants to look to make a pawn push somewhere in the centre to free up this light squared bishop. One of the most obvious ways to open the eyes of this bishop is by pushing this c pawn to c5. So if we imagine that white say played rook a d1, black now goes pawn c5. However, the problem with this is that now this pawn can take on b5, and after recaptures we can pick up that pawn very soon, but not straight away, because if we take with the bishop here, then black can simply chop on d4 and there's a pin down the c file towards our own queen. So instead of taking this b pawn straight away, instead we would first take on c5, and after say knight takes c5, now we can win this b5 pawn and we've got a clear advantage. So if we run back to this position here, this is why the move c5 isn't really working for black, and so this now leads black towards the move d5. So ideally black would like to play this d5 move to start clarifying things in the centre and opening up the board for the constrained pieces here, especially the bishop on b7. Now black can't necessarily play d5 straight away and achieve a good game, because after bishop takes f8, king takes f8, white can now play b4. And the problem here for black is that we're really clamping down on this c5 square, making it very difficult for black to ever push this c pawn forward and therefore open up the eyes of the bishop. So that's the big problem with the immediate d5 for black. So if we run this position back slightly, it begs the question for black, well, what if they could first take on a4 and then after pawn captures back, now play d5, because white no longer has a pawn on b3 to then push forward to b4 and clamp this c5 square at the end of the variation. So if white now takes on f8, king recaptures, and now white has to find a new way to play and might not be able to keep this bishop out of the game as he wanted to, because black is more likely to be able to play c5 at the right moment. So once we realise that black has this latent threat of capturing this pawn on a4 to move our b pawn away and then play d5, we can come back to this position here when we played rook a d1 and consider, do we have a better move? Is there a better place to put our rook to prevent this plan from black? And this is what then might lead us to the very prophylactic move of rook a b1. And this may at first look like a silly move, but this now prevents black's idea of taking the pawn on a4, and after pawn recaptures, if now d5, bishop takes on f8, king recaptures, and now we can actually win a pawn by going e takes on d5, and after pawn captures, we now have pawn takes e5, knight recaptures, knight on f3 recaptures. And the problem here for black is he can't recapture this knight as he'd like to, because then we have rook takes e5, queen takes, and that queen was overloaded, so now the bishop on b7 drops, and this reveals the entire point of playing this rook along to the b file. And so this prophylactic move of bringing the rook to the b file actually prevents that d5 push because of the resulting variations. And coming back here after rook a b1, it should be noted that if instead of taking on a4 with the b pawn, black instead decided to push d5 straight away, now white has the strong response of taking on f8, king recaptures, and now once again we can push b4 to clamp down on this c pawn and kill this bishop on b7. So coming to here, after rook a b1, black is now forced to find a new plan, because b takes a4 doesn't work, c5 doesn't work, d5 doesn't work, and so black is really going to have a tough time freeing up his position and allowing his pieces to come into the game. For white's part, however, the pawn centre is more fluid, and so white can continue to slowly build up and prepare a pawn push at the right moment. So I hope you found this video really helpful. If you did want to check out more examples of prophylaxis, then I can definitely recommend the games of Anatoly Karpov, a great practitioner in the 70s and 80s of playing prophylactically. There was also Tigran Petrosian playing in a similar period, just slightly earlier. And then you have Aaron Nimzovich as well, going back to the early 1900s, another real master of playing prophylactically. So definitely check out some of their games if you want to see some of this in action. There's some really nice squeezes played by those players that are really beautiful to watch. As always, thanks very much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe, and I hope to see you again in another video.